Good day, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Executive Insights by Shipping and Freight Resource, where we feature key executives from the industry. Today, I have with me Bertrand Chen, who is the CEO of Global Shipping Business Network based in Hong Kong. For those who might not be aware, GSBN is a neutral, not-for-profit consortium that enables paperless digital trade and making it accessible and sustainable. Welcome, Bertrand. Glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Can you give me a quick brief about GSBN and its complete role in the industry, please?
Sure. So we were incorporated in 2021 in Hong Kong, so almost 4 years now. And the original vision is essentially to use a blockchain to try to digitize the industry. And over time, I think the vision, the mission has evolved into something more simple, which we call the three main pillars that we're trying to do, which is enable trade to become more paperless. It's essentially a documentation, which I'm sure the subject we can talk about later on with the subject of EBL, but also making the global trade more accessible from the point of view of trade finance to make sure that traders have access to finance and sustainable, because there's a very key topic for many shipping line, but also terminal operator, BCOs, who are now looking at how they can help decarbonize the shipping industry. So those are the three main things, pillar, if you will, that we're focusing on. And I guess the evolution of the vision over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years was when it first started, wasn't exactly clear which product will take off, what actually needs blockchain, and even if your blockchain is a good idea, if you will, right? And over time, I think something that's very clear is electronic bill of lading is becoming a key product. And that's why I think I appreciate a lot of the writing that you've made, because I think you are the guru of bill of lading, any form of bill of lading. And this switch to electronic bill of lading is really interesting. And that's kind of the tailwind behind the growth of GSBN. And if you will, we won't even go further than just pushing for electronic bill of lading, because I think it's very restrictive way to think about it. It's purely as a documentation change, right? So a lot of people misunderstand the transformation and say it's switching from paper to electronic format. It's a much bigger change, and almost like the first small step, but that can potentially make a much bigger change. And the way some I would say a trend, but expression I'm trying to kickstart in the industry is basically the EBL is effectively the same impact as the container has on the movement of goods, but the equivalent for data for the industry. So essentially creating a data container, because I think there's a lot of parallel in the way full adoption of EBL can do for the transfer of data between traders, between stakeholders in the industry, and what container has had for goods between the different stakeholders in the traditional shipping industry.
Very eloquently put about the difference between the paper and electronic bill of lading, and you're very right about the perception in the market. So you've been a force in the market for the past 4 years since you started it. But what are some of the challenges that still persist in the adoption of the EBL since your inception? What have you seen?
Yeah, so I think the EBL adoption is no question has been greatly improved over the last, let's say, 2-3 years. We're seeing a tipping point, right? It's really evolving fast, but still it remains, I think, relatively low in the industry, right? Much lower than I think someone would have expected after the COVID-19 crisis, where using paper is such a drag and you can't really do operation, right? And I think there are still some challenges. So I think typically people would highlight technology, legal certainty as challenges. Personally, I actually don't believe they are really challenges, in the sense that you had Bolero, iStocks, bunch of solutions for many, many years, right? And then technology is good enough. You can execute. It's not really a problem. The legality also is not really a problem, because you had rule book from 1998. So a lot of the reason I think that's preventing people to adopt electronic bill of lading is the paper actually is not that bad. Paper is really convenient, and people have been using paper for many, many years, right? And outside of certain scenario where you have disruption, a loss, then you start to feel the pain of paper. So to some degree is the advantage of switching to paper compared to the pain of switching to paper, right? Because there's some pain to switch to paper. The trade-off is not super clear in certain scenario. And then what we see today in terms of the EBL adoption is there are some stakeholders who have been convinced. They're the early adopter of EBL, right? They see the benefit immediately. And typically, I think the trade lane where we see most of that is between China to US. So adoption in China is the highest, right? And then so small, medium-sized freight forwarder are using that quite heavily. And they see the benefit immediately from a cost, from a reliability, from a user experience. But some other stakeholders still like, hey, I need all my partner to start to switch to this electronic version. Even I want to do it, they may not want to do it. And then what about the danger of this happening? So people don't like to change. And when they worry about this kind of scenario, I think that's a hindrance. I think the second and probably the biggest challenge I see going forward is I think we're still pretty bad at telling the story of the value to switch to EBL, right? So if the value of switching EBL is purely to get rid of paper, to save some money, actually, I would argue, or even for sustainability, right? It's more good for the environment. I actually think it's not very convincing for a lot of people. People in this industry is very pragmatic, right? And very conservative. I've done stuff for many, many years. Those are not enough good reason. So one example, I think, where we need to spend more time to solve these challenges is more a question of narratives, creating a more interesting reason to switch to EBL. A lot of people will be surprised. They say, hey, Seaway Bill is great. Like, why do I need to switch from Seaway Bill to EBL? I would argue actually EBL is better than Seaway Bill. There's a lot of things Seaway Bill can do, EBL can do. There's a lot of Seaway Bill cannot do, the EBL can do, right? And you don't have to have Seaway Bill, TEDx release, OBL, all those different variations. You don't have to have so many different ways to handle things. Just use EBL. But that's something that most people are not really understanding the impact or willing to recognize that this is happening.
So I hear the lack of awareness is still a major issue for the adoption of EBL. Although, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of stuff in the news and media. It's still, I think, we need to create a lot more awareness. Are you able to give some numbers that GSBN has done in terms of percentage growth or numbers growth in terms of the EBL adoptions?
Sure. So in 2023 is when we first start to have EBL issuance. So starting from zero, at the end of the year, 120,000 EBL were issued and circulated on GSBN. So that's a fairly fast growth, right? And then so last year, 2024, happy to report that we increased more than, I think, 132%. So basically, the end of the year, the stats is more than 280,000 EBL in 1 year. Wow. So if you do the math, that's effectively 400,000 in 2 years. And I think the growth is, I see more and more upticks, right? And that's what I mean by it's a tipping point. But I also recognize that the early low-hanging fruits have been picked, right? Okay. And we need to think carefully, what is the additional value that we can create, additional thing that we can do? And you need to be creative. You cannot just keep going same message saying, hey, it's cheaper, it's safer, it's good for the environment. A lot of people, this argument does not work with them, right? They need to say, hey, I'm practical. Why do I need to care about this, right? Sure. For instance, today, if you have a conversation, people will say, I want to talk about resilience. I want to talk about my rates. I want to talk about capacity. I don't care about documentation. Why you come to me talk with documentation? But I would argue documentation, this electronic form, will have impact on resilience. And therefore, a supply chain leader needs to take into account this. But I think this narrative, this explanation is still lacking, in my opinion.
That's good. That's great to hear about the numbers. That's quite encouraging. So I read recently that you've welcomed new Sealand Corridor or Land Sea Corridor as one of your members. So does this mean this expansion is going into dry ports and rail networks and not just for sea? What is the benefit for the broader ecosystem you see?
Yeah, so I think when GSBN started, right, we're focusing obviously on the maritime side of the business, right? So having a container line like Costco Shipping, OCL, Hapag-Lloyd as founding member, and then we also have now ONE, CMA CGM, and more shipping line, container line as a member. But the idea is why stop at the maritime, right? At the end, there's more forms of transportation that is required for shipping. So the two things obviously come to mind is rail and also truck, right? And then if we go back to this vision of bill of lading as the main vector of growth, is basically master BL, house BL, right? And then some for the BL that's not as well recognized, if you will, as the bill of lading, the maritime bill of lading, which has a proud long history, right? A lot of precedent that people trust it. The house BL is not designed the same way, or at least the perception of the market is not the same. So when we start to collaborate with New Sea Corridor, the idea is, can we extend a lot of functionality that we have on the maritime side to the land side? Because what you really want is to offer more alternative of shipping to traders, right? So essentially, I have the maritime leg, I have the train leg, and maybe even the truck leg, potentially on the same system or system that's compatible. And I think that's a new trend that's really interesting. That could be one of the narrative to drive adoption of EBL, right? Because if you have something that you can trust across end to end, that's super valuable, not only for control of title, but also potentially for financing, insurance, all the ancillary service you want to provide for shipping. So that's one direction that's really interesting. And I enjoy your, I don't actually familiar with that, but there's obviously the MLETR, right, which is the model law electronic transfer record, which is pushed by Unitrol. But there's another project right now, which is also super interesting, which we're watching very closely, which is the negotiable cargo documents under UNTROL. And for those who doesn't know, yeah, it's very esoteric. It's the idea to extend the validity of the maritime to all forms of transportation. And this is potentially a convention that I think it's in discussion to be adopted in the summer this year. And potentially, if it's adopted, then it'll be up for vote for the General Assembly of the United Nations at the end of this year. If it comes to pass, country can just sign this convention, and immediately you have this new legal framework, which is not the bill of lading, the maritime bill of lading, but what we call the NCD, negotiable cargo document, which can cover everything. Right, so the legal framework covers everything. And that's really interesting to us because what we think is potentially the EBL is a product that can cover all forms of transportation. And I think that becomes really interesting because then the banks get interested, insurance get becoming interested, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so you're looking at the combined transport bill of lading, which does the full place of receipt to place of delivery. It covers the whole legs of all forms of transport. That's a great initiative as well, Bertrand. All the best to that. I hope there's more uptick in the market because of that as well. And GSBN has also been very vocal about collaboration. And I see you've signed, excuse me, some MOUs with some of the major players like Costco and PSA, Sabic and Hutchinson and the likes of those. How do these collaborations make sure that GSBN's capabilities are completely brought to the fore? How does that resonate with the adoption of EBLs?
Sure. So yeah, I don't want to keep talking about EBL. Sounds like GSBN is just looking at EBL. That's not the case. I think EBL is what we think the vector of growth, the most interesting thing. But the idea ultimately is to create value for the entire ecosystem, right? It's not just about the shipping line, not just about the terminal, not just about the BCO, not just about the freight forwarder. It's an entire ecosystem who needs to transform at the same time. And we want GSBN to be the platform to enable that, right? That's how we were set up. And this collaboration brings to the table the perspective from different stakeholders. So what the shipping line wants may be different than what the customer wants. Typically, it could be at odds, right? Because there's a conflict naturally. What the terminal wants and when the customer wants, the shipping line wants also are interested to consider. So the idea is if you want to solve the problem system, typically it's about striking a balance between the interest of each so you can create a better system of transportation. If you think about a container, right? So 1956 first, I mean, I think it wasn't first 1956, but first now captured in the book The Box is the first time you have a container shipped by Malcolm McLean, right? The insight was it's not just a box, right, on a ship, on a truck. It's a system of transportation where you have all those legs and they all interact, work together. And what we see is over the last, let's say, 60, 70 years, you really have this transformation where every mode of transport is interconnected, works together. What's lacking, I think, is on the data and digital side. You don't have as well interconnection between all those pipelines. So on the physical side, it's very easy, relatively easy, let's say, to move goods. But the data side, it's actually really, really hard, right? We're still using email, phone call, paper. And if you want to transform that, is number one, creating a medium to transfer this data. And I think EBIs could be one. Another way is balancing the interests of each, such the data exchange creates value for everyone. Because some people actually, right, makes money by not exchanging data, keeping some opacity in the market. But I believe more value will be created by exchanging data than keeping data close to the vest.
Good. Now that you mentioned the stakeholders, I'm going to sort of put you on the spot and try to find out which party in the chain do you think is holding up the digitalization or the progression of the digitalization? Because you mentioned it's not as quick as we expected because all the facilities are there, but it's just the adoption that's not happening as quick as we would like to. So which party do you think is holding up that?
That's a tough question. I think what happened is this, right? So my previous career was in finance. I was a trader on Wall Street, right? And then the product was traded as a derivative product. And then there's something that we all face. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. So in the market, when you trade derivatives, the same product, your action impacts the action of the others, okay? So in a complex ecosystem, these kind of things happens a lot. And as a trader back then in derivatives, I knew that if I sell something, that's going to push the other guy to sell, and then the price will go down, though I should sell now. This kind of mechanics is very, very, very easy to understand for me. And it's very, very similar in this industry for the shipping line and the rates, right? And I don't think actually is one stakeholder specifically who holds back, who does not want to digitize. I think everybody wants to digitize. However, there are so many dependency on other people that makes it really, really hard to be the only one to make a change, right? So to that, actually, it's really admirable if you think about for some of the ship airlines, hey, we're going to create this initiative, we're going to do this, we're going to go alone, because more likely than not, you're going to fail, right? Because you're the only one doing that, everybody else will just stand back and watch you, and it's not going to work. So creating this ecosystem is really difficult because you have to balance the interests of everyone. But without doing that, it's very hard to change. So maybe give you an answer that I don't fully, not a hedging answer, like not saying I don't say this guy or this guy. I think for some aspect, the carriers are more willing to change because they're driven by the customer. They're very close to the customer, right? They want to compete and create better service for their customer. On the terminal side is more difficult because they are serving the carriers and their position, the value is effectively that they are sort of a landlord, right? So flow has to go to this location and they make sure they provide good service to the carrier and the flow will come and they have to control the costs. User experience is not as important to them because ultimately they don't face the customer. The carrier faces the customer and they are downstream of this. So you ask them to change or to innovate or to be more digital driven. It's a tall order because they don't have the muscle and they don't deal with the customer. So that's potentially one way you see it's not the holding back, but how do you propagate the benefits or even the incentives such that they also want to change? Then you have the freight forwarder, right? Who are kind of intermediating between different carriers providing service. Some of them want to digitize, wants to innovate, but they also have the same problem, which is you don't want to be the only one going too fast when the rest of the industry is not as fast and you'd be potentially penalized because you're providing something of value, but people don't want to pay for it and you have a higher cost. Lastly, something that I think on the shipping side we don't talk about enough, which I think is interesting, is the banks. Because the banks are the one who have the flip side of the coin. You have this industry who move goods, the other side who finance those transactions. They also are interesting position because they have done trade finance for hundreds of years a certain way, right? And they want to change, but they don't have the power to change because they say, hey, I can't change bill of lading because that's controlled by the shipping line, right? If the shipping line doesn't change, there's nothing I can do. I want to digitize, but they don't digitize. But now it's interesting. What I observe is the shipping line say, you know what, we're going to go 100% EBL. And the banks are like, wait, hold on a sec. No, we have digitized. Oh, we may not be ready. Oh, what's the business case? What do we want to do? So I think the difficulty is not that there's one single player who's not want to do. Is at different time, you have different stakeholders who are sort of the bottleneck. That's one thing. The second thing is you want the entire stakeholder in this segment to agree to change. Because if a single person change, most likely they're going to fail rather than succeed. And therefore, there's a less incentive for them to try. So long story short, you need more initiative like GSBN, DCSA, BIMCO, like we have industry-wide. Actually, if you think about it, there's no equivalent for the terminal side. It's interesting, right? So you have DCSA looking at the standards of the shipping of the container side, us building platform, they are building solution and working with partners. On the terminal side, you don't have this kind of forcing function. The banks had something in the past, but most of the solution, like on blockchain at least, failed, right? Contour, With.Trade, Marco Polo. So it's in the end, I think the answer maybe is complicated.
It is actually very complicated. Sorry, one last question is there as well. Is it the reason that GSBN has set up the Trade Finance Advisory Group? Is that something that would help in this issue that you have with the financial institutions?
Yeah, so Trade Finance Advisory Group was always something that we consider very important because we identified from the very beginning that if you only drive change from the shipping industry perspective, you're missing a very big component in the equation, which is the financial side. And we are firm believer that ultimately supply chain flow and finance flow, they are linked. They have to be linked, right? It's not the case today, right? They operate in parallel track. They don't talk to each other. They create some pain point. Going forward, we believe that with infrastructure like GSBN, with the new instrument like EDL, these two can really connect and work together. So the purpose of the Trade Finance Advisory Group is create sort of a framework for us to engage directly with banks, with HSBC, Bank of China, DBS, various banks, right? And our interaction with them over time has learned a couple of things. Number one is the banks do want to change, but also they're bracing into understanding what is the new role of a bank in this new world of trade where you have this digital infrastructure. What is the value position from the bank perspective, right? What can they do? Plus, they also have their challenge because there's a series of new products coming on, let's say, the blockchain or DLT side for the bank, where potentially the role of the bank are disintermediated, right? With a stable coin, CBD, central bank digital currency, and token, where payment between banks or between financial actors can be facilitated. So what it means to be a bank also could change drastically over the next 10, 20 years, what the role they play in trade, right? So I have no doubt that the traditional trade bank, the HSBC, Standard Chartered, DBS, will always have a role to play, right? They all need to finance trade. But the form of product they offer, the way they interact with the customer, I think that would change quite drastically. So one example I can provide you, which I think to me is fascinating, actually two examples. So we have one project where we work with Central Bank of Hong Kong called HKMA, called Project Ensemble. We look at, can we tokenize EBL such that EBL can be used in the workflow of payments and also financing for trade, right? So the EBL is a token now, and you can settle what they call doing atomic swap. You can exchange money and EBL at the same time, right? So there's no, the two transactions happen exactly at the same time. So that's actually pretty cool, a new way of doing things, right? So that's with the central bank and create value both for the EBI, but also for the stable coin, the central bank digital currency. Another use case I think that's really interesting, and it's more coming from Europe. I think since December last year, Trafigura, which is a very big name in commodity trading, has I think created in partnership with ING loan facility, syndicated loan facility, where the EBL, and this one I think was issued on ICE, so as ESS stocks, as the collateral, right? So the EBL is the collateral to manage this loan facility. So what we see is the convergence of the shipping and the finance is the same market, same product, right? It's how do we facilitate trade? And I think if you don't have a component working closely with the banks, understanding the product, also sometimes with central bank, with a digital token, and they're doing, then you're missing a big part of the value of adopting EBL. So one thing you can potentially say is maybe adopting EBL is not about switching from a paper to a digital document, but rather is having a new means of financing, of payments, of managing your supply chain finance, because you have this new electronic form of documentation, right? So I think that's the thing that people potentially are missing, which is I think is really interesting.
Which was your original point to start with anyway, that it is not just the bill of lading, it's the whole process.
Yes.
Bertrand, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show and chatting to you, and learned a little bit more than we usually would. And wish GSBN all the best in driving the adoption more and helping global trade and making sure that it is more accessible and more sustainable. And all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Arash.